In this lecture, we consider the president in his third role, that of chief diplomat. The two presidencies thesis asserts that there are really two different presidencies, one over foreign affairs and one over domestic affairs. And the president has several advantages that make him more powerful in foreign affairs than in domestic affairs. For example, many international crises require a rapid response. Congress is notoriously slow, but the executive branch can move rapidly. In addition, many matters of foreign affairs require secrecy, and it's much easier to keep a secret among a small group of presidential advisors than among 535 members of Congress. In addition, the president has access to more information than anybody else because both our diplomatic corps and our spy agencies report directly to him. Another advantage that the president enjoys in foreign affairs is the fact that he's the only person who can legitimately claim to speak for the entire United States. Because unlike senators or members of the House, he's the only person who's elected by the entire nation. Finally, in the area of foreign affairs, there's been a tradition that Democrats and Republicans should pull together and present a united front. But the increase in partisanship in Washington has spilled over into everything, including foreign affairs. Now let's consider the specific powers that the president possesses in the area of foreign affairs. The Constitution gives the president the power to appoint ambassadors, as well as to receive ambassadors. As a result of the previous two powers, presidents also possess the very important recognition power, although it's not stated expressly in the Constitution. Simply put, the United States can only have diplomatic relations with governments that it recognizes as being legitimate. And presidents have the sole power to decide which governments to recognize and which governments not to recognize. For example, China is the most populated nation on Earth, and in 1949 the communists took power there in a revolution. But because of opposition to communism, presidents refused to recognize the government of China until Jimmy Carter did so in 1979, 30 years later. The Constitution also gives presidents the power to make treaties. These treaties must be made with the advice and consent of the Senate. In reality, the Senate has very little input on the content of treaties and merely votes on them. The Constitution sets a high bar for Senate approval of treaties, requiring a 2/3 majority vote. Despite this, the Senate has approved the vast majority of treaties that have been submitted to it, more than 1,500 in total. Only 22 treaties have been defeated outright on the floor of the Senate, although these have included some very high-profile treaties, including the Treaty of Versailles, which ended World War I and established the League of Nations. In addition, almost 100 treaties have been withdrawn from the Senate because they would almost certainly have been rejected. Like most things, opposition to treaties has been growing as partisanship has been increasing in Washington in recent years. The Constitution is silent on whether Senate approval is needed to terminate a treaty. But the Supreme Court has decided that it's not. Presidents may end United States involvement with a treaty on their own. Another significant presidential power in foreign affairs is the power to enter into executive agreements with foreign countries. Like treaties, executive agreements have the force of law. The main difference is that Senate approval is not required. And they're not mentioned anywhere in the Constitution. Once upon a time, executive agreements were rare, but today they're used far more frequently than treaties. The number varies, but it averages around 400 executive agreements a year, or more than one per day. Many worry that this gives too much power to the president, but attempts to end executive agreements have fallen short. Through a series of laws, Congress has also given the president the power to impose sanctions on foreign nations. Many of these sanctions are economic in nature. For example, the president has the power to deny most favored nation trade status to other nations. Denying that status makes it harder for them to trade with the United States. The president also has the power to declare nations state sponsors of terrorism, which restricts the kinds of goods that can be sold to them. Finally, presidents also frequently attend summits, which are meetings with one or more heads of foreign governments to discuss issues of common interest. For example, every year presidents attend the G7 summit, a meeting of the leaders of the 7 largest industrialized democracies.